In the spring of 1726, a few months before his death, Sir Isaac Newton received at his Kensington home a young scribe named John Conduit, his nephew-in-law and future guardian of his most secret manuscripts. What transpired that afternoon would not be recorded in the official annals of the Royal Society, nor mentioned in the official biographies of the great physicist. For decades, those words would remain guarded as a forbidden treasure, whispered only among the innermost circles of occult scholars, until finally emerging from the shadows of history as an extraordinary confession about the deepest nature of human existence. The manuscript, only recently discovered in the private archives of an old library in Cambridge, reveals that Newton, at 83, had reached conclusions that transcended his most celebrated scientific discoveries. In those final months of life, when Earth's gravity could no longer adequately sustain his weakened body, his mind had delved into unexplored territories of consciousness, where the laws of physics gave way to the laws of the spirit. The mental recording, as he himself would describe it, had begun to form years earlier, when Newton began to perceive patterns that repeated themselves not only in the movement of celestial bodies, but in the very trajectory of human souls through multiple existences. What had begun as intellectual curiosity about hermetic and alchemical writings had transformed into a visceral understanding of how individual consciousness navigates through the dimensions of experience, deliberately choosing the challenges and obstacles that would shape each new life. Newton recounted to Conduit how his discoveries about universal gravitation had been merely the prelude to a far deeper revelation. If celestial bodies obeyed invisible forces that determined their orbits, human souls also followed predetermined trajectories, but with a fundamental difference: they actively participated in choosing their own path. During his long nights of meditation and alchemical studies, Newton had begun to glimpse the mechanism by which each soul, in the intervals between earthly lives, carefully examined unlearned lessons, unhealed wounds, and undeveloped talents, then precisely selected the circumstances that would provide it with the necessary opportunities for spiritual growth. This discovery had not come through calculations or experiments, but through a series of experiences that Newton classified as communions with the universal architect. On nights of the new moon, when the tides of consciousness were at their lowest, he could access deeper layers of his own memory, where resided not only the memories of this life, but the echoes of past existences and the plans for future lives. It was through these experiences that Newton understood that his own scientific genius was not an accident of nature, but a tool carefully chosen by his soul even before his birth. In the words transcribed by Conduit, Newton explained how each soul, upon concluding an earthly existence, temporarily ascends to a plane of consciousness where it can observe the complete panorama of its spiritual evolution. In this state, it is no longer limited by the linear perspective of time, but can simultaneously contemplate all its past experiences and future potentialities. It is in this moment of absolute clarity that the soul identifies the aspects of its nature that still need refinement and the qualities it needs to develop to reach higher states of consciousness. The process of choice, according to Newton, resembles the work of a divine architect who designs not just a building, but an entire learning environment. The soul examines different life models available on the earthly plane, considering not only external circumstances such as family, geographic location, and historical period, but also internal characteristics such as temperament, natural talents, and emotional predispositions. Each element is selected not for pleasure or ease, but for its ability to provide exactly the experiences necessary for spiritual growth. Newton described how his own choice to be born in a time of scientific transition into a modest family in rural England had been deliberate. His soul had identified the need to develop not only intellectual capacity, but also the humility and discipline necessary to serve as a channel through which universal truths could flow into human consciousness. The apparent loneliness of his childhood, the premature loss of his father, and the relationship challenges he had faced throughout his life were not punishments or cosmic accidents, but carefully orchestrated opportunities to forge the kind of character necessary for his future discoveries. The most surprising revelation of the manuscript concerns the role of human relationships in this process of choice. Newton explained that souls often form groups or learning circles that commit to reincarnating together over multiple existences, assuming different roles in relation to each other to provide mutual experiences of growth. Those who appear in our lives as antagonists or challenges are not always karmic enemies, but are often kindred souls who have agreed to play difficult roles to provide us with opportunities to develop qualities such as patience, forgiveness, compassion, or inner strength. This understanding had profoundly transformed Newton's perspective on his own personal difficulties. The conflicts with contemporaries such as Robert Hooke and Gottfried Leibniz, which for decades he had interpreted as petty intellectual disputes, revealed themselves as carefully choreographed cosmic dances to stimulate both his own evolution and that of his adversaries. Each debate, each controversy, each moment of tension had served to hone specific aspects of his personality and expand his understanding of both science and human nature. For those who follow these extraordinary revelations about the mysteries of existence, it is worthwhile to continue this journey of discovery, for there is still much more to be uncovered about the secrets that Newton guarded for decades. The manuscript of Elias Thorne. The manuscript reveals how Elias Thorne came to understand that life's greatest challenges aren't obstacles to be avoided, but the very elements each soul seeks to experience. A person born with physical limitations isn't being punished for past mistakes, but may have chosen this specific experience to develop qualities like determination, compassion, or to contribute unique perspectives only that condition can provide. Similarly, those born into privilege face the specific challenge of using their resources and opportunities to benefit not only themselves, but all of humanity. Thorne described how, during his experiences of expanded consciousness, he witnessed the process by which his own soul had examined diverse possibilities of existence before choosing to be born as Elias Thorne. He glimpsed other potential lives he could have lived, as a simple farmer who would develop a deep spiritual connection with the land, as a craftsman who would perfect his art until it became meditation, or as a merchant who would learn about human nature through endless social interactions. Each possibility offered different lessons and opportunities for growth, but his soul had specifically chosen the path of the solitary scholar because it was the most effective way to develop the qualities needed for his specific mission. The choice of specific challenges also followed mathematical patterns that Thorne began to decipher. Just as he had discovered that planetary orbits followed precise laws, he realized that the trajectories of souls through multiple existences also obeyed ordered principles. Each life built upon the previous ones, creating a spiraling progression where the same fundamental lessons were revisited at increasing levels of complexity and subtlety. A soul that needed to learn about love might first experience romantic love, then familial love, then love for humanity, and finally universal love that transcends all particular forms. Conduit recorded how Thorne described the specific moment when his soul had chosen the intellectual challenges that would characterize his existence as Elias Thorne. In a state of consciousness he compared to being suspended between the stars, his soul had contemplated humanity's need to better understand the laws governing the physical universe. It perceived that this understanding was essential not only for scientific progress, but as a fundamental step for human beings to recognize their own divine nature and their place in the cosmos. To fulfill this mission, his soul needed to incarnate in a body and mind capable of intuiting universal mathematical truths, but also in circumstances that would provide the isolation and discipline necessary for deep work. The choice of a solitary childhood, an introverted personality, and a tendency towards obsession weren't accidents, but carefully selected tools. Each seemingly problematic characteristic of his personality served a specific purpose in the grand plan of his existence. Thorne also revealed how he had come to understand that the moments of greatest suffering in his life weren't failures in the divine plan, but precisely the points where his soul was performing its most important work. The depression that had afflicted him during his younger years had forced his mind inward, uncovering inner landscapes that no formal education could have revealed. Periods of social isolation had created the space necessary for cosmic truths to emerge into his consciousness without the interference of worldly noise. During his experiences of expanded consciousness, Thorne had also glimpsed how other souls around him had made their own choices. His mother, whom he initially resented for remarrying when he was a child, had chosen to play that specific role to teach him about emotional independence and self-reliance. His teachers and mentors had accepted the mission of guiding his intellectual development, each contributing specific elements necessary for his growth. Even those who had created obstacles in his path had willingly participated in this larger plan, knowing that their challenges would stimulate discoveries that would benefit all of humanity. One of the manuscript's most profound revelations concerns the role of illnesses and physical limitations in the soul's choice process. Thorne explained how he had understood that his own frail physical constitution wasn't a disadvantage, but a deliberately chosen condition to direct his energies towards intellectual and spiritual rather than physical activities. His tendency towards digestive problems and his extreme sensitivity to external stimuli had functioned as natural filters, protecting him from distractions that might have diverted his attention from his essential work. He described how each physical limitation corresponds to an amplified spiritual capacity. Those born blind often develop extraordinary intuitive perceptions. Those who face mobility challenges may develop a mental and spiritual mobility that transcends any physical limitation. Souls choose these experiences not as punishments, but as concentrated forms of learning that can significantly accelerate their spiritual development. Thorne also revealed how he had discovered that each person's natural talents aren't random gifts, but specific tools that each soul brings from previous existences and continually refines. His own ability to intuit universal mathematical laws had been developed over multiple lives, where he had worked with different aspects of cosmic harmony. In a previous existence, he might have been a musician who discovered the mathematical proportions in musical harmony. In another, an architect who applied sacred geometric principles. Each life had contributed a different facet of the same fundamental understanding. The manuscript reveals how Thorne began to perceive signs of his imminent transition to another plane of consciousness. These weren't just the physical symptoms of aging, but subtle alterations in his perception that indicated his soul was preparing to complete this phase of its journey. He began to see colors that didn't exist in the normal visible spectrum, to hear harmonies in apparent silences, and to feel presences that couldn't be detected by conventional physical senses. These experiences weren't the hallucinations of a failing mind, as some might interpret, but signs that the barriers between different dimensions of consciousness were becoming more permeable. Elias Thorne was beginning to gradually regain the broader perspective his soul possessed before incarnating, preparing for the moment when he could again contemplate his existence from a universal viewpoint. During these episodes of heightened perception, Thorne had glimpsed aspects of his upcoming existences. He saw himself as an educator who would develop methods to make scientific knowledge accessible to all social classes. In another vision, he appeared as a woman who would use intuition and compassion to discover natural cures for diseases that would plague future generations. Each future possibility represented a different facet of the talents and qualities he had developed in his current existence as Elias Thorne. The physicist explained to Conduit how he had come to understand that death is not an end, but a moment of spiritual graduation. Just as a student completing a university course leaves that institution to pursue further studies, a soul completing an earthly existence ascends to more sophisticated planes of learning. The sadness that the living feel at the death of loved ones is understandable, but it's based on a limited perception of what's really happening. In fact, we should celebrate when a soul successfully completes the challenges it chose for a specific life and is ready to proceed on its evolutionary journey. Thorne described how, in the higher planes of consciousness, where souls transition after physical death, there's a time of review and integration where all the experiences of the recently completed life are processed and transformed into lasting wisdom. This process isn't an external judgment where a divine authority determines punishments or rewards, but an assessment made by the soul itself as it contemplates how much it has grown, what lessons it has fully learned, and which aspects still need development. It is during this period of review that the soul decides whether it's ready to incarnate again, or needs more time in the spiritual planes to integrate its experiences. Some souls choose to return quickly, eager to immediately apply what they've learned. Others prefer longer periods of contemplation and preparation. There's no urgency in the spiritual realms, as time functions entirely differently outside of linear physical experience. Thorne's most extraordinary revelation concerns the role of love in the process of choosing life experiences. He discovered that what motivates a soul to accept difficult challenges isn't a need for punishment or atonement, but a deep love for its own journey of growth and a desire to contribute to the elevation of all universal consciousness. Each soul that chooses to incarnate in challenging circumstances is, in fact, making a loving sacrifice, accepting temporary limitations to develop qualities that will benefit not only itself, but the entire network of consciousness of which it is a part. This understanding had completely transformed Thorne's perspective on human suffering. Instead of seeing it as evidence of existence's cruelty, he came to recognize it as evidence of the extraordinary love of human souls, willing to accept temporary hardships in service of a greater good. Each person facing significant challenges is in fact a spiritual hero who has chosen a difficult path to accelerate their evolution and contribute to humanity's collective wisdom. Thorne also explained how he had discovered that the apparent synchronicities and coincidences in our lives are in fact points where the original plan of our soul becomes visible in physical experience. Those moments when we meet exactly the right person at the right time, when an unexpected opportunity arises that changes the course of our lives, or when a solution appears just when we need it most, are manifestations of agreements made on the spiritual planes before birth. Our soul, working in conjunction with other souls and higher intelligences, orchestrates these encounters to ensure we have access to the experiences and opportunities necessary for our growth. In his final days, Thorne had arrived at a final understanding that transcended all his previous discoveries. He realized that the human quest for knowledge itself is an expression of consciousness' fundamental tendency to return to its original source. Every scientific discovery, every philosophical insight, every moment of spiritual understanding is a step on this journey of return. Souls choose to incarnate and face challenges not because they are separate from the divine and need to reconnect, but because they are expressions of the divine itself, exploring itself through infinite individual perspectives. This final revelation filled Thorne with a deep peace that transcended any fear of physical death. He understood that his existence as Elias Thorne had been only one note in an infinite cosmic symphony, but an essential and unique note that no other soul could have contributed. His discoveries about the laws of gravity and motion weren't personal achievements, but gifts that his soul had brought to humanity as part of its chosen mission, and these contributions would continue to reverberate through generations, inspiring other souls to make their own discoveries and fulfill their own unique missions. When Conduit left Thorne's residence that spring afternoon, he carried with him more than simply transcribed words. He had witnessed a revelation that connected the most rigorous science with the deepest spirituality, demonstrating that there is no fundamental conflict between the rational pursuit of knowledge and the intuitive understanding of existence's mysteries. Thorne had shown that the same universe that obeys precise mathematical laws also operates according to spiritual principles of love, growth, and purpose. The manuscript concludes with Thorne's reflection on the ultimate meaning of human life. He had come to understand that each existence is simultaneously an end in itself and part of a larger process. Every moment of joy and every experience of suffering possess intrinsic value as expressions of the infinite richness of consciousness, but they also serve as elements in a broader pattern of spiritual evolution that extends far beyond any individual life. The truth Thorne discovered in his final years is that we are simultaneously the authors and protagonists of our own stories. Our souls, in states of wisdom and love transcending our everyday consciousness, carefully choose the scenarios, characters and challenges of each life to create exactly the conditions necessary for our growth. We are not victims of random circumstances, nor products of blind fate, but spiritual artists engaged in the sacred work of sculpting our own consciousness through direct experience. This understanding does not diminish the reality or importance of the challenges we face, but places them in a context that transforms suffering into meaning, difficulty into opportunity, and apparent separation into profound connection. When we recognize that we choose our challenges with wisdom and love, we can face them not with passive resignation, but with the courage and determination of one engaged in a sacred mission. Thorne's final revelation is that the universe is not a cold machine governed only by impersonal laws, but a living expression of infinite consciousness exploring itself through each individual soul. Each life is a unique and precious experiment, each challenge is an opportunity for discovery, and each moment of consciousness is a celebration of the cosmos' infinite creativity. In this perspective, physical death becomes not a tragic end, but a natural transformation toward broader forms of existence and understanding. The manuscript's final words echo through the centuries as an invitation for each of us to recognize the magnificence of our own spiritual journey. Thorne reminds us that we are far more than we believe ourselves to be, that our challenges are far more significant than they appear, and that our lives have a far deeper purpose than our ordinary minds can imagine. In the end, we discover that we are not merely temporary inhabitants of this universe, but eternal expressions of the consciousness that created it, eternally engaged in the sacred work of awakening to our own divine nature.